Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere or sometime along an indefinable line between the reasonable and highly unlikely? Makeshift Stories presents a monthly journey into the improbable.
Today's story, episode 205, Lunar Rain, read by Mitchell 2, audio post-production by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere in some time, you might not be able to tell the difference between fact and fiction.
I ignored the sickeningly familiar rhythmic buzz coming from the radio receiver as I watched the clouds stretch like candy floss, reaching up to the jet stream over Eurasia. Moscow was still down there someplace, under their opaque, tortured strands. The last messages I'd been sent from RKA, Soviet Mission Control, had tried to explain why the once mighty USSR had suddenly evaporated like spilt jet fuel on a hot tarmac. They had attempted to rationalize why things had changed, why money was suddenly in short supply, and why it was necessary to hide all evidence of a secret Red Army moonbase until sanity returned to the great Soviet project. Other than the intermittent buzzing at 4635 kilohertz, I've heard nothing more from Mission Control in over 30 years. At first, I thought it was a bad joke, then a test. Then, after weeks of silence, I became angry, depressed, and, finally, resolute. I would wait as ordered to fulfill the mission that circumstance had forced on me. I'd stopped tracking the days after the first 4 years and only recently started a diary. I am not sentimental about the past. That's why I didn't feel it necessary to fix it in words on pages I will never read. However, I now believe there needs to be a record. Otherwise, the world will lose an essential part of space history to time and entropy. I like to think this is not about my ego, but in truth, maybe it is. I'm not sure. I was adopted and became a single child of an older couple. My parents lived long enough to see me graduate from the Moscow Aerospace Engineering Institute, then join the Ministry of Defense Space Unit. However, long before the ministry selected me for the project, both had succumbed to ill health. Sickness had dogged their lives since the end of the Great Patriotic War. In part, I was chosen for my lack of personal connections. You see, work is everything for me. At university, I preferred the solitude of a library to the noisy chaos of a busy Moscow cafe. Most fellow students ignored me, and those who didn't called me studious on the rare occasion they even noticed I existed. A yellow light on the telescope tracking control panel has caught my attention. As I move to check it, a fleeting glimpse of an older, thin street person in a threadbare flight suit is reflected in the dead CRT screen beside the telescope tracking control. The stern, ghostly face etched by years of stress stares back through hollowed eyes. Is that really what I look like now? I quickly turn away to avoid the reflection, then adjust a knob until the light turns green, and look back through the eyepiece at the clouds as they are shredded in the jet stream. This is the last functional telescope on the base. I've kept it running by cannibalizing other equipment, but there is only so much I can take apart in my limited world. Seeing the nightlights of Moscow and Leningrad helps me remind myself they still exist, and, in some small part, I like to think the reason they do is my presence here on the moon. Someday, the world will be such that I can stand down, although I doubt my weakened bones and muscles will ever allow me to return home. Is a life of service one well spent? Is this a pointless question since I don't have a choice? In the chaos of the supposed transition, someone, a loyalist I suppose, at the newly renamed Roscosmos, had managed to launch several more landers, disguised as lunar probes, laden with supplies, before all communications had finally been cut. I have my final orders. My training is excellent, and I am proud to say I have been chosen from thousands of candidates. Yes, this is not my original mission, but now maintaining our base, codenamed Zlani Dozd, or Lunar Rain, until it is needed, consumes all my waking time. I am not an extroverted Western astronaut who needs headlines, PR photos, and commercial endorsements to prop up my ego. Seeing the lights of Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, and Minsk glowing in the night is enough for me. While the Americans bathed in the fading glory of the Apollo moon landings, then finally pivoted their space program to compete with us in low Earth orbit, we had secretly pursued a permanent presence on the moon. Yes, the USSR had lost the public space race, but we were not interested in fleeting propaganda points. Apollo had picnicked on the moon for the TV cameras, while the Red Army developed a strategic, permanent presence. Although, out of necessity, few know about this. Of course, that is the point, pulled straight from Sun Tzu's Art of War. I often wish I had brought a copy with me, but I had only packed for a short-term mission. The relevant quote goes as follows. Enemies, when strong, avoid them. If of high morale, depress them. Seem humble to fill them with conceit. If at ease, exhaust them. If united, separate them. Attack their weaknesses. Emerge to their surprise. Zlani Dozd will be that surprise when I am finally ordered to awaken the missiles and send them raining down from the moon. Publicly, Moscow had led the charge to exploit low Earth orbit with Salyut, then Mir, both distractions for the Lunar Rain program. But only days after the missiles had been deployed and the base finally cleared to receive its first full crew, things had apparently fallen apart. I remain convinced the West somehow began jamming our communications, replacing them with false news about the dissolution of the Union of Soviet Republics. Obviously, this is their strategy to smoke out secret projects like Lunar Rain. So, they must suspect it exists, and this explains why RKA cut off communications and why I have not made any effort to make my presence known. The project must remain secret at all costs. I was a member of the development team and remained behind to ready the base for transfer to the first operational crew. They would have spent a year on the moon before being relieved. The plan had been to refuel and launch modified Soyuz with landing capacities from Mir, claiming they were still at the station. The inflatable replicas to cover the missing capsules, in case any American spacecraft or telescope checked, were already in place. Then, just 5 days before the first crew blasted off, I listened, in disbelief, as Chairman Gorbachev resigned and handed the launch codes over to a newly minted Russian president. Fake Western news, I still refuse to believe. The last message had been to stand ready, so here I am, Nikolay Ivanov, patiently waiting. Possibly I could have modified the radio transmitter. Shamefully, I have considered it many times. The base's radio has been designed to send and receive on only one frequency. For 30 years, the base computer and I have listened to an intermittent buzz at 4625 kilohertz, with periodic messages such as ANVF, ANVF, 2170, 2170, 83, Luna, Roman, Olga, Mikhail, Anna, Larissa. I know these messages are meaningless garbage, meant to confuse unwanted ears. But if the computer and I hear rain, fall, and Luna mixed into a message, that is the command to open the safe and punch in the launch codes. To ever respond risks revealing the existence of the base, but listening to the propaganda bombarding the moon harms nothing, so I built a broadband receiver in the first weeks of my forced isolation. Sometimes the inventiveness of the fake broadcasts is overwhelming. They sculpt such a complete and detailed fiction, which changes over time, creating their own history. They are so vivid in their detail, I can easily forget they are just misinformation. I can't begin to imagine the resources and money it would take to create and maintain such an elaborate pretense for decades. However, it reminds me how determined our foes are to fool me into giving up, which only reinforces the importance of my mission. You would think the isolation is the hardest part, and sometimes it is, but I was well chosen. I find comfort in the simplicity and clarity of the mission. There are no extraneous social pressures, no competition, no feeling of inferiority, and no need to appease others' expectations. I admit, on occasion, I think of the characters who populate the fake broadcasts as friends. I follow them with interest, but from the safety of 400,000 kilometers of vacuum. I'm happy when they are, sad when they're not, and grieve when they, as they always do, disappear from the menagerie of signals my radio picks up. I like the news the best. I laugh and accuse when I hear it. Lies. All lies! I like to yell at the voices on the tiny speaker. Wait until Nikolay gets the word. Then reality will rain down on your heads, silencing your clumsy propaganda once and for all. Out of necessity, I have become a farmer, a plumber, and everything else needed to keep the base and myself in good health. My favorite time is spent in the garden, tending to the plants which keep me alive. I have even hacked together a makeshift still, and when I have excess potatoes, I make vodka for special occasions. With it, I've toasted the fall of many fictional politicians and regretted my overindulgence the next day. There is constant noise in the base. The place is full of hums, clunks, and rattles of the air and electrical systems. Before I joined the service, I naively believed space would be quiet and peaceful. But the cold silence is always just out of reach on the other side of the metal and regolith walls I find myself sealed in. In here, it is hot, smelly, and noisy, which your brain eventually filters out until you come back in from an EVA. Then, the noise returns with a vengeance, as if it misses me and wants to make itself known again. But something was gone from the cacophony when I came back in from fixing the actuator on one of the solar panels. The buzzing radio beacon, I sometimes think sounds like a malfunctioning foghorn crossed with a busy signal, was gone from the mix. In its place, there was a voice speaking broken Russian with a Mandarin accent. Lunar Base, this is Longxing 8. We are in polar orbit. We will be over your position in 15 minutes. They are broadcasting on the special band. No one, except one hidden group station, knows about the frequency. So, my first thought is to shut down as many systems as possible to make them think the base has been abandoned, or, even better, unable to find it. I am in the process of doing so when the next message stops me dead in my tracks. This is Longxing 8. We were asked by your government to land and bring you back. I've heard bits and pieces about China's space program in the fake radio broadcasts, but I assumed it was just another wild fantasy. Yet here is one of their new capsules orbiting above. Maybe it's just an illusion, conjured up by my subconscious, which has been secretly harboring the hope of a rescue. Excited and disoriented, I recklessly push the transmit button. This is Zlunidost Base. I'm alive. I'm here. Near the North Pole, in the shadows of Puri Crater. The words have already ridden the ether all the way to Earth before I realize what I have done. My stomach lurches. Wait, I've done nothing wrong, I complained to the hums and buzzes of the ventilation system. It's been over 30 years. 30 years I've been in this can hiding, waiting for the Soviet to rise again. But the day has never come. They know I'm here. They've been told about me. So I've done nothing wrong. I should be rewarded for such loyalty. The part of me which wants to go home tries to convince the part which is saying this is not right. 2 hours later, a star begins to fall from the darkness above, growing brighter and larger until I must shield my eyes as I watch through the control room portal. It comes down 500 meters away at the center of the artificial mounts hiding the missile silos. An hour passes, then the side of the lander, surprisingly large, drops down to form a ramp, and a vehicle rolls out. The radio crackles. Our rover will dock with your airlock. When you hear us connect, please cycle through. It's true, I'm going home at last. I feel something I hadn't expected to experience again. Hope. I lose sight of the rover as it drives around to the other side of the base, where the airlock is located. Is there anything I should take with me to document the last 30 years of my life? Sadly, nothing comes to mind. Then I hear a series of muffled thumps and scramble to the airlock. I open the inner door, securing it behind me, then wait impatiently for the panel beside the exterior hatch to flash green. As soon as it does, I wrench the hatch open. Air rushes in, but not the metallic, recirculated air of a spacecraft. Instead, it smells of cigarette smoke and aftershave. 2 pairs of strong arms pull me through, and I flop out like a freshly caught fish onto the cold, concrete floor of the training center. A dark-haired woman in a white lab coat kneels and takes my pulse. He's fine, she notes clinically to a group of uniformed men who are crowding around me, like spectators gawking at an accident victim. Too bad, one of them says. We were convinced he'd make it. I was still reeling from failing the final psychological test and was finding it hard to believe. I hadn't lived those 30 years in isolation on a secret moonbase. It had only been 30 days in a drug-induced stupor, sealed in a mock-up in the basement of the training facility. But it had been so real. It still feels as if I've been away for decades. Even now, I am resolutely committed to the mission. Surely they know that. Who else would have endured so much and last that long? In the debrief, I tried, unsuccessfully, to argue China was not aligned with the West, so I really hadn't given away the location of the most important military asset in the Soviet arsenal to an enemy. I suppose I was lucky they had just reassigned me to a regular military unit. I put my foot down on the gas and threw the struggling Lada into 4th gear, trying to accelerate onto the new expressway leading away from the base. I was headed back to the small apartment I would soon need to vacate. I glanced at the worn leather bag on the passenger seat next to me, containing the mementos I had been allowed to keep. It wasn't much to show for a long career in the military space program, just a few photos, a certification for spaceflight, and that was it. I concentrated on the road for 15 minutes, then, feeling drowsy, switched on the radio. Instead of music, an all-too-familiar rhythmic buzz overwhelmed the Lada's noisy cab. Then suddenly a brazen English voice broke in. English? English on the secret special band? That wasn't possible. This is the commercial spacecraft Nova Star, inbound from Earth. We've picked up your narrow beam transmission. Is there anyone down there? Do you need help? Is there anyone down there? Do you need help? The cheap, vinyl interior of the Lada is suddenly gone, and I'm back in Lunar Rain, surrounded by decaying plastic walls, aging electronics, and the overwhelming smell of 30 years of a human in a can. Another test? I bit the skin on my forefinger and yelped with pain. I don't remember feeling pain in the first test, but that proved nothing. The psychological games they can play are complex, and the mind-altering drugs powerful. "This isn't real!" I yelled. I wanted them to know I had figured it out. "You can stop the test. I failed. What more do you want?" The rattle of air conditioning fans 20 years past the replacement date was the only response. But I knew they had to be listening. I waited a few seconds, then added, "Okay, I'll play along, but I won't make the same mistake. However, what is the point of this? Tell me that." Again, only the aging mechanics replied. Then, the radio receiver suddenly cracked. "We've spotted your solar cells and are coming down. ETA 40 minutes. Roscosmos tells us you may have been part of a secret military program. There were rumors about it, but no evidence until now." "I don't believe you. This is all fake." I growl at the speaker grill, this time not pressing transmit. The English voice on the radio is just an actor, after all. Just part of the illusion. Anyway, they can hear me through the microphones hidden in the walls. "I know the scenario you are testing on me. Hostile takeover of the base. Okay, I'll do my part and play this out. Then you will let me go? I've failed already, and I don't want to be part of the program anymore. I want out." I have no idea if my protests are being considered. I half expect an omnipotent voice to break into the illusion and say, "Okay, Nikolay, we agree." But I know they will never do that. They want me to see this through to the end. So, I head to the main control room and find the locked cabinet. Its combination is burnt into my memory. As if it had only been made yesterday, the lock clicks, and the drawer slides smoothly out. I reached in and pulled out a yellowing manila envelope, rip it open, and read. It takes 30 minutes in illusion time to initiate the missile control systems, warm up the silos, and confirm everything is working. 4 missiles show on the board as red. There might be time to troubleshoot them. It is clearly another test. The English voices claim they will be here in 40 minutes. I have almost 10 left. Would that be enough? I decided not to take the chance. The orders are clear. Launch before the base is overtaken. So instead, I concentrate on keying in the emergency launch codes. They were in a separate envelope in another locked drawer. There is an unexpected sound, like something being dragged along the outside wall, which makes me jump and mistype the last code. Then there is a thump and knocking coming from the airlock, and I know I have made the right choice. The testers are devious. They had their fake invaders arrive 10 minutes early. I smile to myself. I haven't fallen for it. With the last code correctly entered and acknowledged, I slide over to the launch control panel, which consists of 2 widely separated red toggles. The system had been designed to require 2 people to operate, but long ago I had installed a metal bar to join them, so that a single person can throw both switches at once. I find it interesting they have maintained that detail from the first test. I grasp the bar. The banging at the airlock grows more desperate. The radio crackles again, and the intermittent buzz ceases, replaced by an unfamiliar, distant voice. "It's Nikolay, right? Look, it wasn't easy to locate this radio station. No one was willing to admit the project existed. Listen, Nikolay, there are people outside trying to get in to help you. They're part of an international commercial expedition. They will bring you home. Your mission is over. Open the airlock." Home. How can I go home? My bones will break like matchsticks. I can never go back. You know this. I reply, guessing this is what they expect me to say. I must complete the mission. I don't know if the hidden microphones are picking up how well I am playing my role, and I don't care. All I know is I am not going to fail this time. I will complete the mission. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. To listen to other great APN podcasts, such as Press Start to Join, where hosts Josh and Alan discuss video games, movies, TV, comics, Star Wars, and more, head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com. This episode of Makeshift Stories is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation. Whether it's funding anti-racism programs, addiction recovery, or food hampers for the hungry, for 65 years, the Calgary Foundation has proudly supported the charitable community to address some of Calgary's biggest challenges. Now, during this period of unprecedented urgent needs, Calgary Foundation renewed its commitment to building a healthy, vibrant, giving, caring, and resilient community. If you're a registered charity looking for a grant, a professional advisor creating a giving plan for your client, or a donor wanting to give back to the community, discover a wealth of resources at calgaryfoundation.org and learn more about their work through Calgary Foundation's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. This episode is also brought to you by ATB Financial. Today, I want to tell you about ATB's new podcast, The Future Of. Join Todd Hirsch, ATB's Vice President and Chief Economist, as he connects with special guests who offer unique and useful perspectives about the future. Explore how our economy and communities can not only brace for change, but embrace the opportunity it creates. From the future of women in business to the changing nature of work itself, The Future Of helps us understand what's coming and what we need to do today to get the tomorrow we want. Featuring 2 episodes each month, plus bonus episodes, The Future Of includes interviews with top community and business leaders from Alberta and around the world. Subscribe to The Future Of in the Apple Store, Google Play, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts are found. And connect to ask your questions about the future by emailing thefutureof@atb.com. Makeshift Stories is released twice a month around the 1st and the 15th. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell 2. Audio post-production by Matthew Erdman. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by David Hume. To find out more about David, head over to davidhume.me. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast services. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.